This podcast is sponsored by Talkspace.
Last year, I went through many different life changes. I needed to take a pause and examine how I was feeling in the inside to better show up for the ones who need me to be my best version of myself.
When you're navigating life's changes, Talkspace can help. Talkspace is the #1 rated online therapy, bringing you professional support from licensed therapists and psychiatry providers that you can access anytime, anywhere.
Living a busy life, navigating a long-distance relationship, becoming a first-step father, Talkspace made all of those journeys possible. I could speak with my therapist in the office. I could speak with my therapist in the comfort of my home. I was never alone.
Talkspace works with most major insurers, and most insured members have a $0 copay. No insurance, no problem. Now get $80 off your first month with promo code SPACE80 when you go to Talkspace.com. Match with a licensed therapist today at Talkspace.com. Save $80 with code SPACE80 at Talkspace.com.
Warning, the following ZipRecruiter radio spot you are about to hear is going to be filled with F words.
When you're hiring, we at ZipRecruiter know you can feel frustrated, forlorn even. Like your efforts are futile, and you can spend a fortune trying to find fabulous people, only to get flooded with candidates who are just fine. Fortunately, ZipRecruiter figured out how to fix all that. And right now, you can try ZipRecruiter for free at ZipRecruiter.com/zip. With ZipRecruiter, you can forget your frustrations because we find the right people for your roles fast, which is our absolute favorite F word. In fact, 4 out of 5 employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the first day.
Fantastic.
So, whether you need to hire 4, 40, or 400 people, get ready to meet first-rate talent. Just go to ZipRecruiter.com/zip to try ZipRecruiter for free. Don't forget, that's ZipRecruiter.com/zip. Finally, that's ZipRecruiter.com/zip.
A warmer from the low, welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Ghost to Ghost Soups with myself, Greg Oops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. We've got another conference preview for you today as we're going to be taking a look at the Ohio Valley Conference. Our good friend Blake Lovell, he does an amazing job over at Southeastern 16. He has joined me many times for this conference preview podcast. He's going to be joining me in segment number 2. We're going to be looking at all these OVC teams, looking at the nooks and crannies of all of them, the changes that we've seen in the offseason, and so much more. Then in the first segment here, we're going to be taking a look at the betting trends, the styles of play, and just what makes this conference tick. In the final segment, I'm going to get you guys my projector finish for the OVC. If you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of 2 ways we fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, letters CM, naming does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. The other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. Did not get in any Twitter/X questions today, but everything is powered by EdgeBoost. Over at EdgeBoost, they're making sure that bettors are able to have access to their funds whenever and wherever they want. For EdgeBoost, they make sure that 100% of gambling transactions do get approved, and when you go to edgeboost.bet, put in that promo code of Greg, G-R-E-G. That'll get you a $1 match on your first deposit up to $25. And now let's get down to business, and let's take a look at an OVC that was very offensively challenged last season. That's the biggest takeaway that I had from this conference. Dead last in terms of overall points per possession in this conference was Eastern Illinois, clocking in 358th in the country in terms of points scored on a per possession basis, but there are quite a few teams that weren't too far behind. Lindenwood, 343rd in the country in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. Western Illinois was down there outside the top 275 in terms of points scored on a per possession basis themselves. You just had a lot of teams that they just weren't able to find their footing with regards to offense. Even Little Rock, who was one of the better teams in the conference, they were 311th in the country in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. Southern Indiana was 296th, despite the fact that they had some relatively good three-point shooting on their team. Western Illinois, you mentioned before, 290th in the country with that regard. So this was very much a defense wins championships sort of conference. And when it came to the defense out there in this conference, you did have quite a few teams that were able to step up. They were able to do a relatively solid job. Little Rock was very much chief among them. For this Little Rock team, in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, they were a top 100 team with that regard. So they stepped up in a big way with that regard. Western Illinois, actually 2 seasons ago, was one of your better defensive teams in all of college basketball. they just took many leaps back. They were 304th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, but Morehead State, a relatively slow, steady team. They were a top 200 team in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. You even had Eastern Illinois be a top 110 team with this regard. Eastern Illinois, 105th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. UT Martin came at you with a different look. They brought in a lot of international men of mystery. They were actually a relatively solid surprise out there in this conference, a top 190 team in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis as well, so that was relatively encouraging. So you did have quite a few teams on the defensive side things step up. Southern Indiana was a little bit rough with that regard. Little Rock certainly was as well, but Southeast Missouri State was really one of the teams of intrigue all season long last season, as they were able to do a very solid job in terms of generating turnovers. They were very good at being able to cut off the three-point line as well. Southeast Missouri State was 50th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, and you're starting to notice that there's quite a few teams that are forming an entity around generating turnovers, and much of that is because you just have a lot of teams in this conference that they don't necessarily have great ball handling. That's why I noticed Little Rock was chief among them. They were 16th in the country in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis, but Eastern Illinois, even for a team that wasn't that great in the conference, they were 27th in the country in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis. You had Southeast Missouri State be a little bit more, shall we say, of a tame team, because Lindenwood was actually 63rd with that regard, but they were clocking in at 67th in the country with this regard as well, and that's a big thing. Who can be able to just take care of the ball in this conference? Because UT Martin, they were 79th in the country in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis, so you had a lot of teams being able to step up with that regard, and just being able to have clean possessions in this conference is something that is a little bit of an adventure for a lot of these teams. Like, you just take a look at these teams at the bottom in terms of being able to take care of the ball. Little Rock was outside the top 275 in terms of turnovers on a per possession basis. Tennessee State, 354th in the country in terms of turnovers on a per possession basis. That was very rough for them. Little Rock, like I mentioned before, they are officially 340th with that regard, but you take a look at some of these other teams at the bottom and left a lot to be desired, to say the least, as you had also down there right around that 300 range, more specifically 314th UT Martin, so that was rough for them. You had quite a few teams that were more in that like 270, 280 range, like Eastern Illinois, 274th in the country in terms of turnovers on a per possession basis as well, so you had a lot of teams that had a tough time being able to flow good, clean offense. Western Illinois, they were 255th in the country as well, and then you had just a lot of styles of play in general that were very interesting. Morehead State, always a relatively slow and controlled team. You sort of knew what you were going to be able to expect out of them. They were back outside the top 300 in terms of total possessions per game for Morehead State, despite the changing of the guard at coach, 337th, as a matter of fact, in terms of total possessions per game. But then you had Tennessee State absolutely gun it. They were 17th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. Now, there was nobody else that was even close to Tennessee State with regards to that. They were very much number one in terms of this conference, and there really wasn't even a clear number two, as I don't think anyone else was inside the top 100 with regards to total possessions per game. I know that UT Martin sped themselves up a little bit more, but even they were outside the top 125 with that regard as well. Tennessee Tech was more around 141st in the country in terms of total possessions per game. Southern Indiana, they're more of an even-Steven team, 159th in the country in terms of total possessions per game, but you've got a lot of teams that they like to play relatively low and slow. Little Rock was another one of those teams that was outside the top 300 with regards to total possessions per game. Western Illinois, throughout their entire tenure under this coaching regime, has been outside the top 275 in terms of total possessions per game as well. So you've got a lot of teams in this conference that they like to play methodically. They like to play relatively slow. They try to hang their hat on defense. They don't necessarily do a great job of hanging their hat on defense, but they try to hang their hat on defense, and have a lot of teams that are right around about that 250 range with regards to total possessions per game. And when you take a look at how that translated from a betting perspective, out there in the OVC, I feel like there were quite a few teams that were very surprising, especially in the non-conference portion of things, because with the Ohio Valley Conference, keep in mind that you used to have Belmont and Murray State really reign supreme in this conference, so it has very much been gutted over the last few seasons. But Southeast Missouri State, 20-10 against the spread. That was a rock-solid mark, one of the better marks in all of college basketball. SIU Edwardsville, they were 18-13-1 against the spread. They were the team that represented in the NCAA tournament. Tennessee State was able to go 7-13 against the spread. You had a lot of teams that were either one game above 500, right at 500 against the spread. Southern Indiana, Little Rock, and UT Martin being three of them. Now, you did have Western Illinois really bring up the rear, 9-18-1 against the spread. And then Morehead State and Lindenwood either went 12-17 or 12-17-1 against the spread. So that was a little bit less than tremendous for them. But outside the conference, you had four separate teams that had at least 60% of their games against the spread. Southern Indiana, Morehead State, Southeast Missouri State, and SIU Edwardsville. While Western Illinois, obviously 2-6 against the spread, they were very much hurting the conference. But what I thought was very interesting with the Ohio Valley Conference is that favorites were able to do quite well in this conference. Now, Morehead State was not one of them, 3-9 against the spread. Part of that is their very slow, methodical play. And then Western Illinois, Southern Indiana, 3-5 against the spread as a favorite. But Tennessee State went 9-3 against the spread in the role of a favorite. SIU Edwardsville, 13-7-1 against the spread as a favorite. Even Little Rock, 10-9 against the spread as a favorite. You did have Tennessee Tech go 5-7-1 against the spread as a favorite, but Southeast Missouri State, they were able to go 9-6 against the spread as a favorite, and a lot of it just stems back to the fact that you've got a very, shall we say, tightly knit region out there. You don't have a ton of travel with regards to this conference. It spans from like Illinois to, I would say, the great state of Tennessee. You've got a lot of Midwest teams out there, and these teams did a really good job of covering on the road. So these like slim road favorites were able to come through time and time again. Lindenwood was not good on the road, 5-11 against the spread there. Western Illinois, 5-10 against the spread on the road. Everyone else was 500 or better, with Little Rock reigning supreme, 10-6 against the spread on the road. Southeast Missouri State, 9-6 against the spread on the road. Southern Indiana, Tennessee State either went 8-6 or 8-6-1 against the spread on the road. UT Martin and Morehead State, 9-7/9-7-1 against the spread on the road as well. And then with regards to a total perspective, you did have a lot of teams out there in the OVC play relatively slowly. Not a lot of three-point shooting outside of Southern Indiana as well. Yet you still have quite a few teams go over the total, with Western Illinois reigning supreme, 19 overs to 9 unders. That's not because of their great offense. That's because their defense really took a step back from season ago. Tennessee State, who played a very harebrained, up-tempo style basketball, 9-11 to the over, 19 overs to 11 unders. You had Lindenwood go 17 overs to 13 unders. Tennessee Tech, 16 overs, 14 unders, and a push. Southeast Missouri State, 16 overs to 14 unders. Now, Little Rock was your very demonstrative under team. They had a tough time scoring, but they were great on defense. 20 unders to 11 overs. Morehead State, 10 overs, 17 unders, and 2 pushes. That makes sense with their slow style play. And Eastern Illinois, 12 overs, 15 unders, and a push for them as well. And when it got to the games out there in the conference, the OVC was just a very interesting conference to say the least, as most of these unders actually came in non-conference play. Morehead State was very good in terms of being able to play unders in OVC play, 6 overs, 13 unders, and 2 pushes. And then Little Rock, 9 overs to 13 unders. Really nobody else had north of a 55% hit rate to the under, while Western Illinois, 14 overs to 6 unders. Lindenwood, 13 overs to 9 unders in conference play. Tennessee State and SIU Edwardsville, both 12 overs to 10 unders. You had a 50-50 split between overs and unders with Southeast Missouri State and UT Martin. So when these teams got outside the conference, because they do play a relatively slow brand of basketball, that's where you were really able to see your unders come through. Now, there were quite a few teams that went more like 5 overs and 4 unders and 6 overs and 4 unders, but Little Rock, 2 overs and 7 unders outside the conference. SIU Edwardsville, 3 overs to 7 unders, and then Eastern Illinois, 3 overs to 5 unders. So very interesting conference to say the least out there in the OVC. Blake Lovell, he's based out there in the great state of Tennessee. He does an amazing job of being able to give all things college basketball. He has joined me many years for the OVC conference preview. He's going to join me next, and we're going to break down all these rosters right here on Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the Beats and Family Podcast, the OVC Conference Preview Edition.
This podcast is sponsored by Talkspace.
Last year, I went through many different life changes. I needed to take a pause and examine how I was feeling in the inside to better show up for the ones who need me to be my best version of myself.
When you're navigating life's changes, Talkspace can help. Talkspace is the #1 rated online therapy, bringing you professional support from licensed therapists and psychiatry providers that you can access anytime, anywhere.
Living a busy life, navigating a long-distance relationship, becoming a first-step father, Talkspace made all of those journeys possible. I could speak with my therapist in the office. I could speak with my therapist in the comfort of my home. I was never alone.
Talkspace works with most major insurers, and most insured members have a $0 copay. No insurance, no problem. Now get $80 off your first month with promo code SPACE80 when you go to Talkspace.com. Match with a licensed therapist today at Talkspace.com. Save $80 with code SPACE80 at Talkspace.com.
And we're back back to Lovey Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the Beast and Family podcast. This is the Ohio Valley Conference Preview Edition, and a man that has joined me many years to be able to break down this fine conference, that'd be Blake Lovell. He does such great work over at Southeastern 16, taking a look at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. He's based in one of the cities that is represented out there in the OVC, Nashville, Tennessee, where you get Tennessee State, so obviously that's a lot of fun. Blake does such an amazing job looking at this amazing sport, and you're able to follow him on the old Twitter/X at the Blake Lovell. Last name is spelled Lovell. And Blake, always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks as always for having me, Greg.
Thank you for joining me, Blake. And Blake, it is a very interesting conference here in the OVC, and I will step out on a limb and say that Western Illinois might not be able to win the conference this year. As for Western Illinois, they were not great last year. They lose darn near everything from last year. They are going to be looking to Tyron Cook, who comes on over from the Missouri Valley Conference and played very sparingly out there to be able to give them some minutes. I just look up and down the boulevard. They've got so many guys that were at the non-Division 1 level that are coming in. Jack Riley from Marquette that didn't see any minutes. I don't know how you take a look at this Western Illinois team, but a few years ago they had a lot of success on defense that really regressed last season. I just don't see it picking up once again this year.
Yeah, I think, as always, we say with some of these teams at this level, new faces and just kind of unproven results, I think you're just going to sort of lean towards wait and see. For some teams, it just, that wait and see is going to be a little bit longer of a wait. And it seems like that's probably the case for Western Illinois, as you said. A team that is going to try to make that jump up, but it does just seem like, like you said, with sort of some new faces and a team that really, if you're looking for that one thing you can sort of identify, maybe that can be the thing that gets them that next step. I will wait and see what that looks like once the season gets here, because right now, at least on paper, it's kind of hard to figure out what that one thing may be.
Yeah, it's going to be rough for them. I will say this team showed a little bit of fight towards back half of the season last year. It's been rough for them since coming up to the Division 1 level, but I think that Lindenwood might be able to put together a little bit of something. Now, they're going to need to get better rebounding, as they really don't have a lot of proven forwards on this team. They bring in Kevin Anthony, a non-Division 1 guy, to be able to help out there, but bringing back Jadis Jones, who was a nice double-figure scorer, a little bit of a do-it-all sort of guy. They bring in Makai Cooper, who was a rock-solid scorer over at Miami of Ohio last season. For Lindenwood, it's been a little bit of a team where they've had like one or two stars and then just a whole bunch of guys around them that don't do a whole heck of a lot. Feels like it might be a little bit more top-heavy this season once again, but it feels like they're starting to be able to build a little bit of depth, and it feels like that offense should be much better this year as well.
Yeah, you said it. I mean, their offensive numbers were just putrid. What else do you say? I mean, their three-point numbers, 26.7%, barely anything contributed from three. And I think, in this era, that's just tough to do, right? It's tough just to not have sort of a team that can add that sort of attribute in any given night, but they were just, again, not very good there. And it was beyond just the three-point shot, but something too, you mentioned one of the things I had in my notes was I think their final 12 regular season games, I think 8 of them were decided either by 6 points or fewer or overtime. So, they played quite a few overtime games down the stretch. They won 2 of those, lost 1 of them, but they also, won some close games, lost some close games. And I think sometimes, like you said, that's the difference, right? If you just have a couple more of those extra buckets, that can make a big difference. And so, yeah, I think they're kind of an intriguing team to look at. Obviously, we're not terrible last year, 16-17, 10-10 in the conference. That was fine. Won a game in the tournament. Yeah, I'm kind of curious that they're probably one of those teams that you probably put on this list and sort of circle a bit. Not necessarily maybe to think they're going to win the league or anything, but at least they got something to build on based on what they did towards the end of last season.
Yep, they certainly do have something to build upon. As joining me on the show, we do have Blake Lovell, who does such great work over at Southeastern 16, joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. Now, this team is not going to have a lot to build on down low, but for Southern Indiana, even though they lose a lot of their top scorers from a season ago, I felt like they did a really good job in the transfer portal. Ismail Habib is going to be coming in. I believe that he spent some time over at Portland State. He was about a 10-point-per-game scorer a year or two ago. I really like the pickup of Ahmad Bynum. He comes on over from UTEP. He's able to generate turnovers. He's able to pop it from three. Trey Thomas was a double-figure scorer at Bethune-Cookman, and while this team is going to leave a lot to be desired down low, this team's objective is very clear. In a conference where there's not a lot of three-point shooting, they're going to look to bomb you from three. And if they can get Shaden Sharp going, who comes on over from Southern Illinois, I think that they've got some real upside.
Yeah, I mean, they do. And like you said, I mean, it's just sometimes that's all you need. It's just that one thing that sort of separates you from everyone else. And maybe, again, a team that was around the, top 100 in 3-point shooting last year, percentage wise, I would think, at least in terms of the point distribution, you'd feel pretty good about them, even eclipsing the number they did last year in terms of, I think they also got around 30% of their points from three. I think it's an intriguing team too. And they're another one that if you look at kind of the way they finished last year, lost quite a few close games. And so by adding some of the new guys to the mix, you kind of wonder, is it going to be a situation where, all right, you bring in a couple guys, got a little bit more of experience maybe, and maybe that's the thing that helps you get a couple of those late baskets, knock down a couple threes, as you said. Maybe that's the thing you sort of look at with this team. So, yeah, even though they finished where they finished last year, kind of was one where, you play out that kind of scenario 100 times. It's really just a couple baskets here or there. And I think at least with some of the guys they brought in, I feel like maybe they pack a little bit more of a punch, at least in that offensive element.
Now, this team, I think, is going to be one of the bigger unknowns out there in all of college basketball. I'm talking about UT Martin because last year, the international men of mystery were actually quite solid for this team. But the problem is a lot of those international men of mystery, well, they are now known men and they got paid in the offseason. So that means that they're going to be looking to Andrej Brkamarovic. Hopefully I got that correct. He's back from a season ago. A little bit of stretch player that came in off the bench. He's able to give you a bit of something at 6'7". Lamine Niang, he's going to be back from a season ago. Began his career over at CSUN, but they lose a lot of that explosive backcourt play from a season ago, and I do think that that's going to be ailing them a little bit, but we've seen with this coaching staff, a coaching staff that is very much based around junior college roots, that they're able to reload in a hurry.
Yeah, I kind of, again, look at a team like this is pretty fascinating to me because, as you said, I mean, you could tell kind of early, like the Jeremy Schulman era gets kicked off last year. I mean, sure, they go 14-19. That's not really wanted to be, but they were a team that at least, again, I mean, we want to talk about, without even looking up the stat, I know as I was looking at their roster and just sort of results earlier, I can't imagine there was a team in the OVC that played as many overtime games as they did in terms of this throughout the entire season. I think they played 6. And when you actually look back at it, they lost 5 of those games. And so right there, like they were right there with an opportunity and, also played some close games that didn't get into overtime. And so you're just thinking of those little tiny results like that and what maybe the difference can be in terms of the conference. Like, I mean, I look back at it, Greg, I'd forgot all about this, but I think this was something maybe we're talking about if you're watching the OVC last year, but they lost their first 4 conference games. Their first 4 losses in conference play all came by a single point. I don't know, again, if anyone has ever done that in terms of your first 4 losses in league play all come by a single point, and 2 of those games were in overtime. So I think that is, like you said, something where you feel like, all right, it's year 1. We kind of get that foundation in place, but then you kind of have some guys who are so good, obviously they're going to have a chance to go get paid elsewhere. So it is one where you're going to kind of wait and see, I think, on UT Martin just to see how some of these, new guys can sort of acclimate. But I at least think there's some confidence in this coaching staff based on some of the things they're able to achieve there in year 1.
No question about it. I think that there's a lot of confidence with this program as well as I really like the hire of Brad Korn a few years ago. He's panned out so well for Southeast Missouri State, won the regular season in the conference, could not quite get the job done in the postseason, but they do return quite a few of their guys. They do lose Rob Martin along Tadrick Washington. That's going to be hurting them, but someone like a Troy Cole Jr. with someone that's part-time starter, that's going to be back. Braxton Stecker was someone that was able to throw in their 9 points per contest. Really loved the game of Brandon Terry, what he was able to provide in terms of just overall efficiency. And for the Southeast Missouri State team, they've added the element of being able to generate turnovers, winning that turnover battle. And this is a team that wasn't necessarily based around hot shooting or anything like that. It was just executing the little things. And I think as long as Brad Korn is there, they're going to be able to bank on that.
Yeah, obviously took a big jump last year, as you said. I mean, to get to 15 wins in the conference and really just, again, put themselves in a position where, it felt like they were having an opportunity to make the tournament. Obviously didn't happen. But still, I mean, they were, again, about as consistent as it gets in a league where, as we talked about throughout the years, I mean, it's just with so many moving pieces and the domino effect of conference, realignment and everything. Like there's just been a lot of new pieces in this conference, but they were very consistent. And like you said, they were able to do it, not necessarily with just one thing. I mean, it was just, they were pretty good in a lot of different areas. Obviously their defensive, prowess was really the big thing that stood out in terms of them just being able to lock down teams And that was, a big key. So, yeah, I'm pretty fascinated by this team. And again, I think it's built on the idea that, it took him several years, but I think, Brad Korn kind of knew that they were always sort of building for that big step forward. And it's not always easy in this era where you kind of know you're going to lose your best players. Sometimes you're going to have roster movement every single offseason. But I think when you at least look at where this roster is at right now, and like you mentioned, some of the guys, who are going to be playing a key role that played a key role last year, I think that is pretty significant too. So, I'm pretty high on this SEMO team once again.
Yep, I am as well. As joining me on the show, we do have Blake Lovell, who does such great work over at Southeastern 16, joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And I think that this team is going to be quite fascinating, as well as Morehead State always plays that very slow, very controlled style. And even with the coaching regime change that we saw in the offseason, they were still a relatively rock-solid team this last year. But now they lose a lot of those players from a season ago. And now it's really where I think it's going to be a little bit tough for Jonathan Maddox to really get things going, because guys like Jerome Morton, Kenny White and company, they were also rock solid for a team that was more or less whole is greater than the sum of its parts. But now you have pretty much all those parts gone. You're going to be relying upon George Marshall to be able to try to give this team a bit of production after he was with the program last season. Tyrone Farrell is a 6'6", a little bit of a combo guy that's going to be coming in from Rhode Island, but didn't even see great minutes over there. And for Morehead State, just being gutted the way that they were in the offseason, I think it's going to make things relatively rough, and it's going to be a lot of guys that are going to have to play bigger roles than what they were intending to.
Like we mentioned too, when Preston Spradlin, took the other job, and you just knew that sort of what he had built there and the consistency and sort of the model that this program had become in this conference, especially too with all the others that had left at that point, it's like, can you just keep that momentum going? And like you mentioned, they really just could not do it last year. Got off to a great start. I mean, that was the thing, right? I mean, it was like, okay, maybe they are going to keep this thing rolling. They were off to an 8-1 start or whatever, but then finished 10-10 in league play. Obviously, there were, a couple of different reasons for that. But yeah, like I think of this as one where you're kind of mixing and matching a lot of new faces. And I think, that's where maybe previously we would have had that confidence in saying, okay, well, Spradlin's been there for years and we feel like, all right, at least he can maybe pull those different strings and make this work. But it is, it's sort of a newer coach that moves into his second season now in this spot. And I think that you want to kind of see if some of these guys you mentioned, like a Farrell and guys like that, can they elevate their production? Obviously you don't always hold it against guys where they were previously and what they contributed there, but it's sort of, can they, elevate themselves into being, all league type players? Because I think that's what it's going to take for this Morehead State team, with a little bit of experience with some of the guys that they're going to have coming in that are older, but you've also got, some of those underclassmen too that are going to have to take a pretty big step forward. So I'm kind of looking at them and feeling like, yes, you can see the best case scenario in terms of how this thing could play out if all these pieces just kind of mesh well together. But you also can understand if there's a little bit of hesitancy just based on the fact that, again, it's not that same sort of Morehead State that had become sort of the model of consistency for this conference.
No question about it. And this is not quite the same Eastern Illinois that we've seen in past years as well. For Eastern Illinois, they're used to being towards the bottom of the conference. It really feels like they've done a better job defensively. I recognize that they went 8-12 in conference play last season, but felt like they were a lot more competitive. Cooper Jacoby and Zion Fruster, two of their top three scorers from a season ago, are back, and you just don't find that very often from a sub-500 team out there in the OVC. Jacoby, 9 rebounds per game. He should be able to dominate down low. This was a team that was actually very good at generating turnovers, a top 35 team in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis. And I don't think that this team has the firepower to be able to win the conference or anything like that, but it feels like finally Marty Simmons, who has done some good work at places like Evansville and company, is starting to be able to get things online for this program.
Yeah, like you said, I think if you just look at it just from the production that's returning, and that's, we always say that, like, it's really, if you're going to start somewhere, you kind of have to start there, because it's just a different era now in college basketball where that's the best place to look, is to say, all right, who do you have returning, and can that sort of help you be in a position where, all right, that kind of helps you take a big step forward. And I think that's where, again, you're talking about someone like Jacoby returns as one of the more productive players in the conference, averaging 12 and 9 or whatever it was. And then, you can obviously build off of that. You can use that as sort of one of your biggest sort of foundations here. And then, of course, again, looking at some of the other guys that you would expect to take a step forward as well. And so I think that's where a team like this, as you mentioned, I mean, Marty Simmons is someone, that was at Evansville for the longest time. We were looking at these first several years at Eastern Illinois, just wondering, all right, are they really ever going to be able to make that jump? And then now, at least in conference play, in back-to-back years, to at least kind of get to that eight-ish type wins. Now is this the year where you can turn that 8 into 10, and all of a sudden you've got a winning record in league play. It's just, the offensive numbers have been what they've been. We've talked about them every single year. They don't look pretty in terms of the efficiency numbers and the averages and all those things. But, if they can just kind of keep taking that step forward, I don't know if that turns into like a conference title or anything this year, but at least if you're looking at maybe a team that can take a jump, again, let's remember this is a team that won 8 conference games last year. Really, that's 2 that separates you from being, basically the 5th place team. Not a lot of necessarily separation in that middle, but this could be a team that tries to make that push forward.
Yep, absolutely. And this is actually going to be the swan song for this team in the conference, in Tennessee Tech, who's going to be moving to the SoCon, which not sure how they're going to do in the SoCon, to say the least, but here they are in their last year in the OVC. They bring back Jawan Nichols, who was able to give the team 8 points per contest. That's rock solid, but they lose pretty much each other top 4 scorers from a season ago. It was a pretty solid backcourt with Johnson squared, Ronnie Johnson, Jalen Johnson, and when you look at what they've got replacing them, it's not great. Brandon Montu, he was over at Western Michigan, one of the worst three-point shooting teams in all of college basketball, so he's going to have his hands full. CJ McPherson is someone that has been around the block a little bit. If I'm not mistaken, spent some time at the non-Division I level, and I look at this Tennessee Tech team losing so much of that backcourt. They don't necessarily have the world's greatest amount of size either, and I feel like this could be a big fall off for them.
Yeah, it's, again, a team where you're just kind of looking at what's going to be sort of the identity, and I think that's it, right? I mean, they were a team that finished in the top 10 last year in terms of, getting 40% of their points from 3, and it's a 15-17 team, went 500 in league play. So obviously they were very based around the idea that, all right, we're going to shoot a lot of threes, and that was kind of their MO. And look, I mean, they weren't bad at it. They finished like around the 100 or so. I think shot around 35%. So it's just, if now, like most teams, you have a little bit of a different roster, what does that look like? Like, what is your approach in terms of maybe exactly, what you're going to try to do offensively? I think at least, kind of, we know some of the things that John Pelfrey's teams have done over the years in terms of just, all right, that's how they're going to play that certain style, this way, that way. But they've also been one of those teams. It's all been about who's on the roster. They've kind of been a team that hasn't been afraid to try out different styles, or sort of, maybe by necessity to a certain extent. So you said about to make that jump to the SoCon, they've not really found their way in terms of just being able to take that next step in the OVC, maybe that people thought they would under Pelfrey, but don't know exactly what to make of them right now in terms of if you're, trying to come up with your league title contenders and all this other stuff. They're probably maybe in that next tier or something like that. I mean, because again, they were one of those teams that won 10 games last year, but I don't really know if that ceiling is much higher at this point.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think that it's been rough for the Pelfrey era, and I'm surprised he's not on the hot seat more than what he is. This has been a Tennessee Tech team that has been less than amazing, to say the least, but a man that is amazing is Blake Lovell, who's joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops for this OVC Conference Preview Edition. And then we've got SIU Edwardsville, who made the NCAA tournament last year. They do lose a lot of those pieces in the backcourt, but Ring Malif, who was a nice piece for that team last season, 6'9", little bit of a combo player, he's going to be back to the fold. You've got some 6'8" versatility in Darian Baker. Last season, Darius Robinson was over at Oral Roberts. He was able to give a little bit of scoring as a bit of a combo guard there. And Jack Champion, he's from within the conference, never really a great scorer over at Southern Indiana, but he's a guy that's able to distribute. He's back as well. Really interesting SIU Edwardsville team that I feel like they're just a really well-coached team, but do have to question the backcourt with them losing so many pieces from that NCAA tournament team.
Yeah, like you said, I mean, it's the same story in terms of how do you replace guys that were very productive. And I mean, I think that's the biggest question. And I think it's sort of, all right, if we know that pretty much everyone is going to have that same ask, then it's just really, okay, who are the other guys that are going to, kind of step into those roles, and who are the guys you expect to sort of take a step forward. And I think that's where I'm sort of looking at this SIU Edwardsville team and feeling like, okay, I feel like I can sort of give them the benefit of the doubt here that they will find a way to figure it out. Because again, if you're just trying to narrow this down to teams that should be in contention, I think they're probably one of those. And it's really just, again, answering those questions of how do you replace guys that were such a key, force in them being able to make that run that they did, win a couple games in the OVC tournament, get to the NCAA tournament. And so, yeah, I mean, they were, a great defensive team last year. They really just defended so well. I mean, that was the one thing you could really count on with them, even though the offensive numbers at times were a little bit up and down, but you could count on them to make the game the way they needed to defensively. And I think that even if, we have some questions about replacing some of the offensive production, I would still look at this team, at least with the roster they put together, and feel like they're going to be another good defensive team. And I think they've got more depth than most teams in this conference. I think they're more experienced. And so, yeah, I feel pretty good about where SIU Edwardsville is at, even if, again, there are a few questions to ask about them.
Yep, and this is a team that's going to need to up their offensive play, but on defense, they were rock solid. That'd be Tennessee State. Now, Tennessee State did average 78 points per game, but that's because they absolutely gunned it last year. They were a bunch that left a little bit of something to be desired at the free throw line as well, outside the top three with that regard, but lots of big men that were able to do a tremendous job of rebounding, lots of second and third chances to be had there. You've got Jeans Yavens LaFleur, a 6'10" big man that's back for this team. J.C. Brooks adds in there quite a bit of size as well. Aaron Kumarua, hopefully I said that correct. He's back from season ago after he was a rock solid wing, was one of their top scorers from season ago with about 11 points per contest. This team leaves a lot to be desired from 3-point range, but I could tell that last season things were a little bit different whenever Travis Harper was in the fold. He missed like 10 games. He's back for this team as well, and I think that that's going to be a real X factor for not just A, but really the entirety of the conference, and he might be one of the best guards in this OVC.
Well, I consider this one of the more intriguing teams, and it's because of the coaching change, with Nolan Smith coming in. Of course, everyone's like, Nolan Smith. Yeah, that's right. The Nolan Smith that played at Duke and, that just came off of being an assistant under Penny Hardaway at Memphis and, those things. So he replaces Penny Collins, and I think pretty fascinated just to sort of see, again, this is a guy that in this era, you need to be able to go get players. And I think when you look at some of the guys they brought in, at least you feel like, all right, clearly, I mean, given the stops that he's been in as a coach, right? Just at Memphis, he was at Louisville before that. Then again, was obviously at one point there at Duke. Also, I think that to me is one of the more intriguing things here is just to see if kind of the roster he's put together in year one. It's going to be tough. We've always talked about the Tennessee State job, Greg. I mean, that's been one of the more tougher jobs that there is, but it's not easy to come in and just kind of have that success. I look back at, remember like the Dana Ford era and get, ones like that where he was able to kind of find those things that worked for this program and be able to kind of push them forward to a level that really wasn't, easy to achieve. And, Penny Collins did that. I think it was his second year, something like that. They had some ups and downs, got a little more consistent there on the back end, but I'm kind of intrigued to see what exactly this looks like in the Nolan Smith era. Because I think, again, one of the biggest things, not just a guy that clearly knows the game, but also you have to be able to build rosters. And I think that he is someone just with the pedigree he has and the connections and all that. I'm kind of fascinated, maybe not for just this season, but beyond this season. What can they do this year that'll help them do all those things you got to do to build this program into, one of the more consistent ones perhaps in the OVC.
And then I saved this one the last for best, and the reason why I saved this one for last is because I think that these guys need to be the favorites in the conference. That'd be Little Rock. You bring back a guy like a Jonathan Lawson, who was just absolutely tremendous last year. 15.5 points, 3.5 assists. He was great. Now, they do lose Milwaukee Wilkerson from a season ago, but how do you replace him? KK Robinson, who was so good for the team 2 years ago, 16 points per game, misses all of last year due to a harsh injury, was averaging 5.5 boards, 4 assists. He's now back along with Jonathan Lawson. The team has done a relatively solid job of bringing guys via the transfer portal. Braxton Bayless, a solid player over at Western Kentucky, comes in. You've got Tukong Gakcic. I've always had a tough time saying that, but he began his career at Florida, 6'9" big man that's able to block shots. And I look at this Little Rock team. They need to be a little bit more efficient on the offensive side of things, but this was actually one of the better mid-major defenses in all of college basketball. Bringing in KK Robinson, in my opinion, should push them to an OVC title.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think they're the favorite. I think it's hard to kind of go with anyone else right now because when you do bring back your top scorer, that's always a plus in the OVC. And I think with Lawson, paired with guys too that, you mentioned are not just coming in, but there's some guys returning on the roster that are going to have probably even more responsibility and be able to be more productive this season. But it's also, like you mentioned, just look at what they were able to achieve defensively last year. They were just a team that, outside of a couple games, they were able to make teams just miserable trying to score the ball. And I think if they can kind of keep up that same sort of trend, you feel like that can be the great equalizer, even if the offensive numbers were certainly up and down. Didn't do a great job taking care of the ball last year. That was one of the things I feel like we were talking about throughout the season. But I think overall, when you just look at it, it does feel like one where when you have kind of the roster that they've put in place, I would think that the new additions combined with returning your best player, I just feel like that easily puts this Little Rock team kind of in the driver's seat heading into the season.
You mentioned making teams miserable in terms of scoring the ball. 14 games last year, they held teams at 59 points or fewer. They were some rough watches, to say the least, unless if you were betting unders. If you were betting unders, they were a thing of beauty, but man, yeah, there were some rough games out there for this bunch, but getting back KK Robinson, I'm right there with you. I think that they win the conference, and a man that's always after my heart with the way that he breaks down college basketball is you, Blake. You do such an incredible job over at Southeastern 16, so let the good people at home know it's all on tap for you, and how people are able to follow along on social media and other platforms.
Yeah, I always appreciate it, Greg. Yeah, you can find our SEC stuff, Southeastern 16 on YouTube, and of course, everything else college basketball. You can follow me on Twitter /X at the Blake Lovell.
And Blake does an amazing job taking a look at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. So big thanks to Blake for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, the OVC Conference Preview Edition. And coming up next, it is that Times Podcast. Thank you to my projector finish for the OVC.
This podcast is sponsored by Talkspace.
Last year, I went through many different life changes. I needed to take a pause and examine how I was feeling in the inside to better show up for the ones who need me to be my best version of myself.
When you're navigating life's changes, Talkspace can help. Talkspace is the #1 rated online therapy, bringing you professional support from licensed therapists and psychiatry providers that you can access anytime, anywhere.
Living a busy life, navigating a long-distance relationship, becoming a first-step father, Talkspace made all of those journeys possible. I could speak with my therapist in the office. I could speak with my therapist in the comfort of my home. I was never alone.
Talkspace works with most major insurers, and most insured members have a $0 copay. No insurance, no problem. Now get $80 off your first month with promo code SPACE80 when you go to Talkspace.com. Match with a licensed therapist today at Talkspace.com. Save $80 with code SPACE80 at Talkspace.com.
And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Great to be joined by Blake Lovell today, who does such great work over at Southeastern 16. Taking a look at this wonderful game that we all know and love of college basketball. Every single time he joins me, he lends such great insights. Did so once again today, and he has joined me many times on this OVC Conference Preview Edition, and he did so once again today. So a big thanks to our good friend and Blake for joining me in the last segment. Now it is that time of the podcast. I give you my projector finish for the OVC. Now, because I am doing a conference preview podcast today, that means that any of the news and notes that we saw in college basketball on Sunday, those are going to be polished up tomorrow. I always want to give as much sparkle and shine as seemingly possible to these conference previews, and I always want to go as in-depth as seemingly possible as I can, and always make sure that all the nooks and crannies are taken care of. And with regards to my projector finish, dead last is going to be Western Illinois. Chad Badreau was able to have a really good defensive team in his first year during the 2023-24 campaign. That really fell off the map a little bit last year, and I just don't know where the defense is going to be coming from. They do bring in Nick Hittle. He's someone that was over at Indiana State, and if I'm not mistaken, he was over at Southern Indiana last year. If I'm not mistaken, he began his career over at Indiana State. 6'10" big man that should be able to give the team a little bit of something, but they're banking on Tyron Cook coming on over from Indiana State, banking on him coming on over from the OVC after he really didn't give them too much of anything whatsoever, and being able to give you production. I just don't know where the scoring is going to be coming from. Like last year, they were outside the top 300 in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. Now, Cook, when he was over at VMI a few seasons ago, was averaging 12.5 points, shot 34% from 3, 2.5 assists per contest, but Even that VMI team was one of the worst in all of college basketball, so they are really looking at him to spearhead things and headline things. You just bring back absolutely nothing from last year. I don't think that they bring back a single guy that averaged more than 2.5 points per contest from a season ago. They're going to be looking at a Kamari Wilson, who began his career over at Stephen F. Austin. He missed all of last year, I assume due to injury, but there's just not a lot here. Jack Riley is someone who's 6'8", should be able to help out the team a little bit down low, but without those big rebounders from 2 seasons ago, this team really struggled last year. I think that it's going to be much the same. If this team is not able to dominate on the boards, it's going to be a rough go of it, and having Tyron Cook and really nothing else in the backcourt, I think that this team is going to suffer. So at number 11 in my projector of finish, going to be going with Western Illinois. At number 10, I have to go with Tennessee Tech. Tennessee Tech was a relatively solid three-point shooting team last year, but you lose both of the Johnsons, who were able to be double-figure scorers. They shot it relatively well from three-point range, and now you're looking to turn the page with having a guy that was pretty rock solid at right around about 6'7", 6'8", and Juwan Nichols, who had 8.5 points, 4 boards, was a little bit limited by injury, but not a guy that's going to go out there, pop it and lock it from three-point range, and he's pretty much the only guy that returns that was able to give you good production last season. Brandon Montu was over at Western Michigan, and he was able to give you a bit of production, but he was on a team that was one of the worst three-point shooting teams in all of college basketball. CJ McPherson is a guy that's going to be stepping up from the non-Division I level. I think that he's got a little bit of upside to him. Jakeem Payne is a 6'6", a little bit of a combo player, so the Payne train should be able to give you a bit of something there, but man, I just think that this is going to be another rough season for them. Grant Slayton is back after he off the bench did shoot 37.5% from three-point, so you've got a little bit of scoring pop there. He was averaging in that neighborhood about 5 points per contest, so there's a little bit of promise, but still they don't quite have the same amount of size down low from a season ago either, because even though they were a team that was really rough in terms of their rebounding, you still have one guy be able to step up, and Daniel Egbaniwe, who was able to give you 6.5 rebounds per game. I'm just not sure if Nichols is able to take that leap forward, and I think that it's going to be another rough year for a guy in John Pelfrey that just hasn't necessarily done a great job with his Tennessee Tech team. Ever since he has gotten there, they have been below 500 in every single season, and I think that trend continues. So number 10 in my projector of finish, I am going to be going with Tennessee Tech. At number 9 in my projector of finish, I have to go with here UT Martin, just because I don't know what I'm going to be able to get out of this team. Afan Trinka is someone that was relatively solid in the backcourt. He's going to be back for the team. And for UT Martin, we were talking about Blake Lovell. They just lost so many one-score games that they were very, very close. With Trinka, he was able to put in there 8.5 points, was able to hold the ball with about 3 assists per contest. And you do have a few pieces that return from a season ago. I actually think that Jeremy Schulman, who came up from the non-Division I ranks, he was a very good junior college coach. He's going to be able to do a solid job here, but you lose pretty much 5 out of your top 6 scorers. Adrija Bramarkovic, hopefully I said that correct, 6 points, 5 boards per contest, he's back. And then Lamine Niang, he's able to give you a little bit of production down low as well, but his team did not really bring in a lot of high-power guys via the transfer portal. AJ Hopkins is someone that at 6'6", he's going to be back, and he should be able to give this team a little bit of production after he was very limited a season ago. But what are you going to be able to get out of some of these freshmen? What are you going to be able to get out of some of these just strange combo players? And they bring in Dragos Lungu. Hopefully I said that correctly. He comes in from the WCC from San Diego, but San Diego is a less than savory team, and he dealt with injury last season. So lots of question marks here for UT Martin. As a result, I did have to put them in my projector of finish at number 9. At number 8 in my projector of finish, I actually do think that there's a little bit of upside here for Morehead State. For Morehead State, it was a disastrous end to the season after they went 8-1 to begin conference play. They do lose quite a few of their top guys from a season ago, but Anur Malak, who stands 6'8", I think that he's going to be rock solid for a Morehead State team that, even with the coaching change, moving on from Preston Spradlin, they still maintain that very slow, methodical style, and Mulak at 6'8", he very much fits that style, was able to give the team 4 boards per contest, was the primary starter for the team, only gave the team about 6.5 points per game, but was pretty rock solid down low. But for Morehead State, this was a unit that they were really able to find something towards the beginning part of the season when Kenny White and Jermaine Morton were able to do a solid job for this bunch. Both of these guys are gone, so now you're looking at George Marshall really having to give this team a lot in the backcourt. Was not really too much of a distributor, was a little bit more of a sixth man that supplied the team with about 7.5 points per contest. And Deontay Miles down low was a really good shot blocker. He was their top shot blocker, and this is a team that's very much built around defense. Losing him in the offseason, that's going to be a little bit rough for them. They're going to be looking to Tyrone Farrell along with Jacob Wilson to be able to help out as 6'6", a little bit of a combo player to be able to help out after last season. They did have that with Kenny White being able to give them some relatively good versatility, but I just don't know if they're going to be able to duplicate that with Wilson. Comes in from Louisiana Monroe, was about a 33.5% three-point shooter, 8.5 points, 3.5 rebounds per game, so the rebounding takes a little bit of a dive, and that was really the big thing for Morehead State. Morehead State last season was one of your top rebound rate teams in all of college basketball, and that made up for the fact that they only shot 31% from three-point range. They just don't have the same level of size and rebounding from a season ago, so I do think that they're going to take a little bit of a step back this season unless if someone like a Tamre Relaford, who he is coming on over from West Georgia, and he was able to give West Georgia some good production. He's able to come in there, give you that great production, and I just don't know if he's going to be able to do so. So in my projector finish here at number 8, I did have to go with Morehead State. At number 7, I'm going to be going with Lindenwood. Lindenwood, I feel like, is starting to be able to get a little bit more depth, and it does feel like this team is on the up and up. They've had a few relatively good, rock-solid pieces, and then they just don't have a lot of depth around them, and I still think that you're going to need to get a little bit more out of the likes of Dontrez Williams than a lot of people are thinking, but and he comes in from Abilene Christian, was one of their rotation pieces, so that's a good place to be able to start. And then Makai Cooper. I think that this guy is going to be actually one of the better guards that you're going to find out there in the OVC. He comes in from Miami of Ohio, and with Cooper last season, he was able to be a very productive player for them. With Mr. Cooper, he was logging for the team about 6 points, 2.5 assists, shot 39% from three-point range as a starter. That's a really good place to start. You've got Tolton back after Jeremiah Tolton. He 2 seasons ago over at Lindenwood was averaging about 7 points, shot 37.5% from three-point range, missed all of last season due to injury. So a Lindenwood team that was in the bottom 15 in terms of three-point shooting percentage, they've got that now all locked and loaded. They bring back Jadis Jones as well. Jones was a really versatile player that stepped up as a freshman and was able to give this team a lot of unexpected production, and being able to get 12.5 points, 6 rebounds per contest, albeit not a great three-point shooter at 6'5", that's a good place to be able to start for this team. You're going to need someone like a Kevin Anthony who's stands 6'10", one of the few guys on the roster that stands above 6'6", to be able to give you a bit of something. But I think for Lindenwood, they were able to find their way in terms of being able to generate turnovers as well in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis. It was a top 125 team in all of college basketball, and I do think that the arrow is finally ticking upward for Lindenwood. So I do have them in my projector finish at number 7. At number 6, I'm going to be going Tennessee State. I know that it was mentioned by Blake Lovell, the fact that you do have Nolan Jones taking over as coach with Brian Collins. It felt like did a solid job last season. He got the team to 17-16. They were much better than they were 2 seasons ago. So very interesting that they made the coaching change, but what I do think that Jones did a good job of was keeping around 2 of their top scorers from the season ago. Aaron Nakamura, hopefully I said that correct, 11 points, 5.5 boards, 3 assists per contest, and then I mentioned it before, Travis Harper was really able to give this team some offensive punch after at the beginning part of the season. There wasn't much of that. He missed 9 games last season. He logged for the team 10 points, 4.5 boards, shot 37% from three-point range, was the only of their top 7 scorers last year, by the way, that shot above 31% from three-point range, so they very much needed him to come back, and being able to have that cog, I think is very big. But for Tennessee State, they do lose a little bit of that size from a season ago. You're bringing in Jean Uviz Lafleur, who is very good at the non-Division I ranks at 6'10". He should be able to do a nice job down low. And Khalil London is someone that I think has a lot of upside as well. He comes in from Charleston. Over at Charleston, he wasn't really able to find his footing with the team. You could tell that he was just a little bit buried on the depth chart there. But I mean, that said, for London, being able to come in and being able to give this team some production, I think that that's going to be nice for them. And I do think that for this Tennessee State team, it's going to be a little bit of a learning curve going from an assistant coach to a head coach for a guy in Mr. Nolan, who did such a good job in his playing career over at Duke, just sliding over a chair. I don't think a lot of people know how big of an impact that is and how different it is. So I do think that with Tennessee State, they're a team that's probably going to struggle early. They're going to be able to surge late. And I do see them being towards the middle part of the conference. So at number 6 in terms of my projector finish, going to be going Tennessee State. At number 5, I do go with SIU Edwardsville, just because with Edwardsville, they do lose quite a bit from a season ago. Now, this is a team coached by Brian Barron, who has done a really good job with them, but Rayshawn Taylor was the heart and soul of that team. 19 points, 4.5 boards, 3.5 assists. Ring Maleth coming back after he led the team in rebounds, 11.7 boards. I mean, that's a good place to be able to start for this team. And Darion Baker, he's back after he was able to give the team 6 points per contest, but you just don't have a lot of three-point shooting other than Miles Thompson, who shot 44% from 3. Here's the issue, though. He shot less than 13 threes last season, so it's not like he necessarily gave you a large sample size there for this SIU Edwardsville team. They are going to need to replace a lot of that backcourt that was so rock solid, and this team has been able to really form their identity on the defensive side of things. Arnis Sakinis, he's at 6'11", should be able to give you a lot of rebounding, and he should see a lot more minutes this year than he did a season ago, but his team is really banking on their backcourt being fortified by Darius Robinson coming on over from Oral Roberts. The flaw with that is that Oral Roberts was just not a great team last year. They were a very disjointed bunch. He did average 7.5 points, shot about 33% from three, but it's not necessarily a primary ball handler. So I do think that that's going to be a big issue for this Edwardsville team. Who's going to be running the point? Is that going to be Robinson? Is that going to be Jack Champion, who comes on over after he was over at Southern Indiana, able to give out 3+ assists per contest over the last few seasons? Not necessarily too much of a scorer, but even when he shot it, he was a relatively good three-point shooter. So I do think that there are some solid pieces, but losing a guy like Rayshawn Taylor, who's obviously the heart and soul of this team, I think is going to be rough for them. So did have to drop them down to number 5 in terms of my projector finish. At number 4, I go with Eastern Illinois. Eastern Illinois is going to be bringing back Cooper Jacoby, who I think is one of the best big men in this conference. He was able to log about 8 rebounds per game for this bunch. He's able to pop it from 3. He's not necessarily an amazing three-point shooter, but Marty Simmons, it feels like he's building up this program right. He's a very veteran, old-school head coach. I spent a long time over at Evansville, so I have a lot of respect for what he's able to do, and he was able to maintain Zion Fruster on the roster as well, an 11.5 point per game score. Guy that shot about 35% from three-point range for a group that last year they were outside the top 275 in terms of three-point shooting, so they very clearly need that little bit of punch. And Kyle Layton, he stays within the conference. They're able to get him on over from Tennessee Tech. He should be able to be a nice contributor right away, along with Andre 3000 Washington. And Andre Washington, he's going to be coming on over from LIU Long Island, and I think that this is going to be a rock-solid ad for them. He missed all of last year due to injury, but you take a look at what he was able to do during the 2022-23 campaign. 11.5 points, 2.5 assists, steal and a half per contest, so he very much fits a system that was in the top 40 in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis. With Layton, not necessarily a guy that's going to generate that many turnovers, but hey, he was able to give for Tennessee Tech last season a steal per contest, 8 points per game, shot 35% from 3, and having that guy down low in Jacoby, I think is a really good starting spot for Eastern Illinois. So I do think that they're going to be able to rise up the standings. I've got them in at number 4 with regards to my projector finish. At number 3, I'm going to be going with Southern Indiana, with having Ahmad Bynum coming into the fold. I think that this was one of the most impactful transfers in the entire conference. For Bynum, last year shot 44.4% from three-point range over at UTEP, was able to log for the team about 10.5 points per contest, not necessarily generating a ton of steals, but he was able coming off the bench. He was able to be a nice spark plug scorer. Now he's going to need to be in a little bit more of a starting role here over at Southern Indiana, because they do lose the likes of Jack Champion and company, but you bring in Shaden Sharp, who was over at Southern Illinois last season. He was a little bit inconsistent over at Southern Illinois, but he's got the ability to be able to draw out the ball. He's got the ability to be able to pop it and lock it. And Ismail Habib was limited to 7 games last year due to injury over at Portland State, but 2 years ago, 9 points, 3 assists, was able to shoot about 36.5% from three-point range. He very much fortifies this backcourt. Now, you just don't have a lot down low for this team. They're going to be banking on Devin Curtis, who spent the last 2 years at Cal. He really didn't see a lot of playing time at Cal, but he's got a big body at 6'11". They're going to be banking on him to be able to give you a little bit of something, because he's pretty much the only guy on the roster that's above 6'7" with any sort of Division I playing experience. But Trey Thomas coming on over from Bethune-Cookman, I recognize that's a lower level basketball. He should be able to come in right away, give this team some relatively solid production, as for Mr. Thomas, he was logging 16 points, a little bit over 2 assists per contest, shot 33% from three-point range. I really love his overall well-roundedness with his game, and I do think that this is a Southern Indiana team that's really found something in a OVC with not a lot of three-point shooting in terms of bombing it from three-point range. And I think that that style is going to be able to win out and yield some great results here. So at number 3, in terms of my projector finish, I'm going to be going with Southern Indiana. At number 2, I go with Southeast Missouri State. Now, Southeast Missouri State could have kept their top 2 guys from the season ago. They would be at number 1 in this. But that said, Brandon Terry, BJ Ward, Braxton Secker, 3 out of their top 6 scorers from the season ago, along Troy Cole Jr. That's a really good place to start. They don't necessarily bring in a ton via the transfer portal. You're going to be bringing in Will Lovings-Watt. He was over at James Madison last season, was limited due to injury. He only played 13 games for them, and when he was out there on the floor, it's not like he was overly productive. 2 2 seasons ago, he was actually pretty solid over at Northern Illinois when he was averaging about 6 points per contest, but has never been like some sort of a 3-point shooting dynamo or something like that. But for Southeast Missouri State, they were one of the better teams in all of college basketball, being able to lock you up from 3-point range. They did a nice job of being able to generate turnovers, having Terry back, who was able to give you 4.5 boards, 11 points per game. I think that that's relatively solid. Team needs to do a better job of being able to haul in there some offensive rebounds, outside the top 300 in terms of percentage of missed shots. That resulted in an offensive rebound, but Elliot Ladowns, he's a guy with a little bit of size. He was a part-time starter last season. I think that he's going to be able to step up, give this team a little bit more rebounding than what they experienced last year. And he's a true 7-footer, so he's a moldable guy, pretty much the only guy in the roster that's above 6'7", other than David Adada, who's a non-Division I guy that's going to be coming in. Dear Marion Walkup is the guy that I think has a little bit of upside as well. They've got great depth. I don't know who necessarily is going to be that top guy. Perhaps it's going to be Brandon Terry. Perhaps it's going to be BJ Ward, but I know that this is a well-rounded team. They're going to play rock-solid defense under Brad Korn, as they always do, and I think that they're going to be towards the top of the OVC once again. So I do have this bunch in Southeast Missouri State at number 2 in terms of my projector finish, but at number 1, I just can't look away from Little Rock here. You bring back Jonathan Lawson, 15.5 points, 5 boards, 3.5 assists per contest. He shot 43% from 3-point range. Now, Little Rock was outside the top 275 in terms of points scored on a per possession basis, and you lose Mwani Wilkerson, Lon Jordan Jefferson, but I mean, KK Robinson, who was so great for the team 2 seasons ago. Now, you do have to wonder how he's going to be coming off of a major injury that costed him the entire season last year, but I mean, last we saw him, he was averaging 15.8 points, 5.6 rebounds, 4.3 assists, 1.2 steals per contest on the mid-30s 3-point shooting, 32.5% from 3-point range. And then you've got Tokong Gakic, who down low last season was able to give the team about 6 boards per contest, began his career over at Florida. He's able to give you a block and a half per contest, and as a big man, he was able to generate about 1.7 steals per game as well. This Little Rock team was really good at terms of generating turnovers. They made life miserable for teams. They were one of the slowest teams in all of college basketball, a top 30 team in terms of opponents' 2-point shooting percentage. This is a team that has a clear identity on the defensive side of things, and they've been able to do a nice job in terms of being able to elevate that offensive game as well. Kazic Nasec, hopefully I said that correct. He comes on over from Penn State. He was also at Xavier. He had 6'8", actually gives his team even more size as well. And then Braxton Bayless coming on over from Western Kentucky. He was able to give the team about 2 assists, shot over 40% for 3, 8 points per contest, was a good 3-point shooter over at Niagara as well. That's really the missing offensive element that I feel like they needed last year, and that was the lone thing that was really keeping them back. It's a little bit of a top-heavy team, so they're going to need to have guys like Cam Wallace, Trayvon Jackson be able to give them a bit of something, but I think that they're going to be able to do so. And I do think that Little Rock going to run the OVC. I've got them number 1 in terms of my projector finish, and that'll wrap things up for the OVC Conference Preview Edition right here on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Big thanks to Blake Lovell, who does such an amazing job over at Southeastern 16, for joining me in the last segment. If you do like hearing from his fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one of 2 ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, letters EM, name does not matter, so per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And I'm with you guys every single day on this podcast, regular season and off season, so I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.